welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. We're going to be having a great show talking about the real history of America. I didn't know that we didn't know what was going on, but I guess we're all going to find out. And to do that, we're going to be speaking with Carl Lehrburger about his new book, The Secrets of Ancient America. You all know that Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer. So if there's stuff going on in your life, give me a call, send me an email, and we can set up a time for a private consultation to sort it all out. But I have a number of different announcements to make. For one, our other sponsor, the Institute of Applied Energetic, has their training programs on sale for the month of April. So if you've been thinking about starting a new career as an energy medicine practitioner, intuitive counselor, or medical intuitive, all of their certification programs are, as I said, on sale right now. So go to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and check it out. And even if that's too much for you, you can always download our Jumpstart Your Intuition program, and that's free. And I like free. Also, and I've talked about this on the show before, my movie Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients, was available on Amazon Digital Download. Thank you, all the people that have downloaded the movie and have put great comments on Amazon. But we now have it actually in a hard copy, on DVD with a case and shrink wrap. It's so pretty. Anyway, so that's available on the soulhealer.com site. And to launch it, we are actually offering a huge special. We have the Icon movie, a copy of my book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, and my book, Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4, bundled together at unbelievably low price. So if you've been thinking about getting Icon, for your library, check it out. Get some great savings all through the month of April. Okay, well, that was exciting. Let me tell you a little bit about Carl and get him on the air. Carl Lehrburger is an environmental activist, renewable energy entrepreneur, researcher, and author. He has studied archaeological and sacred sites in the Americas for over 25 years with a focus on the ancient people who came to America long before Columbus. The culmination of his investigations is his book, The Secrets of Ancient America. So please welcome, his webpage is newhistoryofamerica.net, Carl Lehrburger. Hey, Carl, how's it going?
Hey, Dr. Rita, it's going great, and it's wonderful to be here, and greetings to Just Energy Radio listeners out there.
Well, it is just so nice to have you on, and I'm very excited to find out more about America that's being hidden right in front of our eyes, but under our noses, both of those places. So let's start here. Let's start easy, and then we'll work into the tougher questions. What got you started exploring ancient America?
Well, by background, I'm a renewable energy entrepreneur, as you said in your introductions, and in working in biomass utilization and other areas of scientific pursuit, I've taken a very rational and scientific approach to my endeavors in life. Although, like you, and like probably most of your radio listeners, we walk on the edge. But I've tried to bring a very technical overview to presenting a new history of America, to make it credible and to be able to fend off the arguments of the archaeo-priesthood, those that really stand in the way of the new history, and those that seek to reinforce the old history. So when I read Barry Fell's book America BC, published in 1974 or 1976, but I read it in 1986, I really got excited because Dr. Fell, a microbiologist from Harvard University, presented dozens of very well documented cases of visitations by old world peoples to the New World, including the Celts, the Phoenicians, and many Mediterranean peoples, as well as Indus Valley people. And I couldn't believe it, because I thought I was a pretty well-educated person. And to find out that all this time, and right under my nose, as you pointed out, because I was living in New England at the time, where much of the research that Dr. Fell presented took place, I was just in almost a state of shock to find out that at least 2,000 years ago, the Celtic people of the Iberian Peninsula of Europe had a stronghold and were colonizing, were mining, were mapping the New England part of America. And I was later to find by hooking up with mentors and teachers and authors and really the gurus in the area, that the Celts had expanded westward and had made it into the central parts of the United States and left their mark in stone in Kansas, parts of Oklahoma, Colorado, and many other states. So
and we're definitely going to get into all that, because we have 2 hours, 2 whole hours, Carl.
As the introduction, how I got into it was by following the little bits of gold that were left by other researchers that came before me, and allowed me to find my way to sites and document them for myself, that in fact Columbus as an explorer was really the last, not the first, and he was preceded by explorers and colonizers and groups that were fleeing disasters as well as political problems, both on both sides of the Atlantic and both sides of the Pacific. And ignited my interest by Dr. Fell. I just pursued it with all my passion, and came upon some new discoveries, as well as revisiting what previous researchers has come up with, which indicates that there is a tremendous amount of work and evidence that proves that many old world peoples visited America long before Columbus. And what's most confounding about all this is that these serious claims of old world contact have been ignored, and in fact have been covered up by the archaeological community. So part of the work in Secrets of Ancient America is not only to address who was here and why they were here, but why we don't know about our history and what's behind this cover-up.
Well, and that's a great question, which I'm sure we're going to get into, because I like that kind of stuff. It's kind of like a soap opera, and you get into all the dirt of who's like doing what with who, and it's juicy. One of the things that I appreciated about your book was that you took a lot of information that seemed to be scattered all over, and a lot of material that I had never come across, and consolidated it all into one book to make it be a reference, and you give good references. So if someone wanted to pursue further what a certain author was talking about or what their theory was, they could take it the next step based on the material you provided. So kudos on that.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead.
If I could just add that as much as I wanted the book to be current, there's so much exciting discoveries that are happening that it's going to have to be updated almost immediately, because in spite of the work of the archaeo-priest community, which includes the archaeologists, to cover up a lot of the evidence of these ancient peoples, it's really the amateur archaeologists and the people that are impassioned by sacred site work that have really come up with a significant body of research and evidence, and in some cases smoking gun proof that Columbus was last, not first.
The part that I think is saddest is that academia does not take someone that does not have a certain pedigree associated with them, and they turn around and say, well, you can't know anything because you don't have this degree or that degree, when people like yourself or myself, even though I don't have a degree in archaeology or anthropology, it's like, I can read, I'm smart, I can put two and two together just as well as anybody else.
Well, this is a case where the so-called scientific community doesn't use the scientific method of investigation. And because somebody isn't credentialed, they don't have credibility in the archaeo-priesthood community. But it's a contradiction, because if you don't have the go for it and the approval of the archaeo-priesthood, you will never get your papers published in graduate school, and you will certainly never get tenure. And this has been one of the big problems for academics who want to pursue the old world connections, that they're really, to a large extent, have been thwarted, and in some cases actually kicked out of universities. A great case is a mentor and someone who I featured in the book, Dr. Gunnar Thompson, who wrote American Discovery, which is a really great book that details many aspects of diffusionism. But he's never been given tenure, even though of his being able to graduate as a PhD. And when he was in the archaeology school, they wouldn't allow him to publish his paper on diffusionism, so he had to switch to another department. So this is somewhat indicative that to get past the gatekeepers, you have to toe the archaeo-priesthood line. And unfortunately, that line, is that the Columbus was a discoverer of America, and that perhaps we can concede that the Norse people made it here a little before Columbus. But as to the tremendous body of work and evidence that suggests that the Egyptians, the Celtic peoples, many different Mediterranean peoples, as well as Indus Valley cultures made it to the Americas long before Columbus, is completely been ignored and is not presented in the history books. And Dr. Rita, this is the tragedy that we face here. History, I know, is not the most popular subject, but when you look at the secrets of ancient America, you find that you're not just talking about history, and you're not just talking about archaeology. We're talking about the technologies that the ancients used to get here in terms of the astronomy, the application of astrology, navigation, mineralogy, alchemy. I mean, these were not primitive people. These were very advanced, and I would go so far as to call them magi in some cases, that came to the Americas, and I think we can say in some cases imparted some of their wisdom to the Native Americans at the time. And one thing we can say for sure is that they left their mark in stone, and recording their cosmologies, and in some cases their languages.
And I'm just going to make a statement about your comment about history not being popular. history, if you read history books, they're all about invasion, conquest, and wars and power. And to me, that's really boring. It's like you've seen one war, you've seen them all. And I don't need to read about how these people need to exert power. It's not a comfortable feeling. But when you start talking about history from a more cultural, like I have a minor in art history, primitive art and ancient art, it was more about the people. It was more about what they did and their symbolism, and it was people. There were people involved. It wasn't just wars. And I think it's just a very different look at our history than what is taught in schools under the guise of history.
Well, that's the great point. And I know of your interest in universal archetypes of the ancients. And, I was able to find in the rock art throughout North America some of these archetypal images, and they're presented in the most creative manner, and it's quite understandable why the archaeologists and the archaeo priesthood have missed them altogether. That it's the language of the ancients is really beyond their grasp. And a great example of that is the field of archaeoastronomy. And throughout the world, the ancients used archaeoastronomy, what we call archaeoastronomy, as a way of communicating and understanding their cosmologies in the context of astronomy and astrology. And they articulate this language in monumental architecture, such as the Kukulkan Temple of Chichen Itza, and including Stonehenge. But in North America, this is mostly represented in petroglyphic animations and petroglyphic archaeoastronomy markers. And
so, let me stop you one quick second. Can you explain to the listeners what archaeoastronomy, what that term means a little more specifically?
Yes, archaeoastronomy is as I alluded, is really an old science, but today it's a new aspect of archaeology that combines astronomy and archaeology to investigate not only the cultural aspects of ancient peoples, but the timekeeping aspects, and in some cases you would have to say the ability of the ancients to put their rituals into play in light shows. And by light shows, I mean the use of light and shadow on petroglyphs that are calibrated for specific days of the year. So that, as an example, an archaeologist looking at a petroglyph might want to make a judgment about it. But if he were to go on the equinox and look at that petroglyph, he might find there's a whole other dimension where the ancients were able to place that petroglyph so that a light and shadow art form would strike that petroglyph, designating a certain day to celebrate, or a certain aspect of their religion to pray to. So the archaeoastronomy really is a kind of a new way of interpreting ancient wisdom that has been encoded into ancient monuments, as well as many ancient petroglyph sites. And I must add that this is almost a universal art form that is not just seated in the Americas by Old World peoples, but has been in use by the ancient Americans and their ancestors for thousands of years. And some of the most famous archaeoastronomy in North America can be found in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. But the point is that the ancients had a language of communicating, of recording time, and of presenting their mythologies. And this is best understood through archaeoastronomy.
Would you say that when you look at the petroglyphs and the relationship to time, I'm trying to like formulate this question, and the relationship to time, is there a story that goes with it? And I'm just trying to think of something like Easter. You know, this is Easter weekend. So we know from the Christian narrative, you know, that there's the Last Supper, and then there's, you know, Jesus gets whipped, and then he gets hung on the cross, and on Sunday he raises from the dead. And so if you're in the Christian tradition, you know that story. And so, you know, it's tied to Easter. And so in those traditions, when you have these conjunctions that are happening, do you are there stories, or do you believe that there are stories that are illuminated because of that time crossing?
Absolutely. And really, that's the point. And I've documented a dozen of these uh, very sacred days that are celebrated by the ancients. And these sacred days include the two solstices around December 21st and around June 21st. In particular, the two equinoxes, which occur around March 21st and September 21st, and then the four sacred cross-quarter days, which are the days between the equinoxes and the solstices, which include Beltana, as it's called in the Celtic religion, and that is celebrated around early May, and has come down to us in the form of May Day, and also Lunasa, which is the harvest festival in August that takes place in early August. Now, you brought a great example of celebration in mentioning Easter, but the ancients were most prone to celebrate the equinoxes, and one of the best examples of not only a depiction of a celebration, but an actual moving light show or a heliolithic animation where the moving light over the petroglyphs tells a story, occurs in the panhandle of Oklahoma. And it doesn't involve the Christian religion, but it is by an earlier religion known as Mithraism, that celebrates the sun god Mithra. And in this particular cave, known as Anubis Caves, on the equinox, as the sun is setting, there's an image of a sun god and a very elaborate petroglyphic panel. And in addition to the sun god, there's a canine petroglyph that has a staff coming out of its back. And this canine has been associated with the Egyptian god of the dead, or god of the night, Anubis. And just to give you a sense of what happens as the sun is setting, the light in the cave dims over the sun god, and his head goes into shadow, representing the death of the sun god on the equinox and at sundown. And as all this is happening, the god of the night, Anubis, stands above Mithra, the sun god, in illumination. And this moving light picture show is accompanied by inscriptions that can be read in a Celtic language, in a writing system called Ogham, spelled Ogham, and often pronounced Ohm. And we find Ohm inscriptions in Ireland and in England dating at least 1,500 years ago. But the scientific community has not recognized the American Ogham that is found at I'd say several dozens, if not more, specific sites that articulate a prayer or a phrase or directions in a Gaelic language. And in the case of Anubis Caves, where we have this light show showing the sun god going into shadow on the day of the equinox, the Ogham inscriptions that can be read in Gaelic are invoking the onlookers to pray for the god Bel, B-E-L, another sun god, and invoking Grian, Grian, another manifestation of the sun god. So not only do we have the actual petroglyphs that describe the sun god, and in the case of Anubis Caves, Dr. Rita, I would say that it's not just the masculine that's presented, but we find feminine deities as well, including a Sheila Nagig petroglyph, which is a very distinctive Celtic petroglyph, and a controversial image of Epona, the goddess of the hunt. But these images are inscribed in stone and are accompanied by Ogham inscriptions that can be read in Gaelic. And why the priest community won't come down and investigate these, which to me are clear proof, smoking gun evidence that the Celts made it to Oklahoma, and they inscribed in these caves a description of their cosmology, of their deities, and provided a Mithraeum, if you will, a temple for Mithras in Oklahoma. And this is just one of many different examples of how the ancients used archaeoastronomy in the New World, and to pay homage to their deities and to record that they were here.
I wasn't planning on asking this till later, but I'm going to ask this now because it just has my curiosity. In order to plot where the figures are going to be, wouldn't you need to be in a location for at least one equinox prior or several equinoxes so that you could make sure that the alignment of where the petroglyph is going or lines up?
I don't think you would have to, but that's a great question. But I think that typically that's probably how it was done. But my own personal opinion is that they had different techniques to see to know when the equinoxes and the solstices were about to occur, and that they were very, very astute and very quick on their feet, so that they could be out there a day or two in advance, see how the shadows are playing, maybe use chalk or some type of a chalky material to designate where it's going to strike. Now, what they've recorded in the rock art, although they're calendrical, these are not the devices and the methods that they use to determine when the equinox and the solstice and the cross quarter days were. They had other devices and methods and calendar counting to do this, so that it wasn't dependent upon that. And once calculated, or that the equinox was going to be in 2 days or in 3 days, they were able to start looking at how these shadows would line up. I would say this, and this is one of the most amazing things for an amateur astronomer like myself to see at these sites, is how precise the timekeeping aspects of it are. And in the case of, as an example, the Anubis Cave animation that I described, and I talk about this in the book, there's a little sun petroglyph that shows a 4-year cycle of the sun that kind of goes back and forth over 4 years, and it's a very, very minor movement of the sun over a 4-year period. And this 4-year cycle is recorded in the petroglyph, so you could actually see the cycle work. So these were not arbitrary. These were extremely specific, and not only were the timekeeping aspects of it very specific, but the artwork and the depiction of the goddesses and the images are so precise. Of the thousands of petroglyphs that I've seen, I rarely ever see any mistakes. These ancient people that were pecking these glyphs were masters. And today we have pens with erasers, and we have pencils with erasers. You just don't find mistakes out there in the field, and that gives me more belief that these were master magi's. They were not only connected to the cosmos, but they had tools and capabilities in their both right brain and left brain that have really sit dormant in many cases in the modern humans.
Two comments. First is, it always amazes me looking at all of the carving in Egypt. I mean, they are raised carvings and they're perfect. I mean, I know if it was me carving it, this guy might be missing part of an arm, and something would definitely be misspelled because it would just be me. But they're not. They're pristine. With that said, you're talking about they're going through this whole process of creating these markings and documenting this 4-year cycle, but that lends evidence to that they were here in America, not just for 2 weeks and took off. They were here for an extended period of time that they apparently needed to be able to keep time while they were here.
One of the my mentors who really researched the Anubis caves, William McGlone and Phil Leonard, they gave, I'd say, scores of presentations to archaeologists, to universities, and they all ended up being debates. And finally, when the archaeologists couldn't, disprove what McGlone and Leonard had come up with, they said that Leonard and McGlone had created these glyphs because only they had the knowledge of the Celts and the Ogham and all. And Bill McGlone was able to show that a graffiti created in the 1890s that overlaid some of the petroglyphs proved that 1890 graffiti came after the glyphs were put down there. So it's a continuous a challenge to the archaeopriest and the archaeological community to find their way to these sites after they've researched them, to verify what previous researchers have already documented. And why there's such a resistance to this is a whole topic, and I know that you've discussed this in your work, as well as interviews you've had with other explorers like Brandon Hall, for example. But it remains a mystery why the archaeological community refuses to look at the evidence. And this is one reason why I crafted Secrets of Ancient America, and hope that it's going to be one of the books, one of the stories that really opens up this field, so that we can usher in a new history of America, not based on the lies and the concoctions of manifest destiny, but in fact of the history of what actually transpired before Columbus.
In your book, I want to go here. In your book, you provide an alternative history or an alternative narrative to Columbus. What I recall learning in school was that Columbus was looking to find a shorter route to China. And since everybody had been going, and I have to think, to the east, he decided to go to the west. And lo and behold, poof, he hits this land and thinks he ended up in India. Is that not the case? Isn't that how the story really goes? You can laugh now.
Okay, well, I'm holding it. I'm holding it pretty well here, but the bottom line is that story is a total fabrication. And what I concluded is that, and not just me, but many researchers, that Columbus knew about America. He knew where he was going, and he knew about America from two main sources. One was his wife Philippa, who was intermarried with the famous Drummond Sinclair family of the Orkney Islands. And it was Henry Sinclair who traveled to the Americas in the 1200s. And so certainly that side of the family had access to not only stories but maps. But even more importantly, the libraries in Toledo, Spain, that were abandoned by the Arabs contain thousands of maps that the Columbus brothers, Bartholomew and Christopher, were able to get their hands on, and had extensive knowledge of how the trade winds worked, how many days it took to get to the New World. So it was a complete fabrication, and to reinforce that, they weren't, bringing gifts to emperors of India or of China, but they were bringing with them little trinkets and trading items that they did use to trade with the people of the Caribbean. So he certainly knew about the trade currents. He knew about the New World. He knew how long it would take, and what we learn in the story of Columbus is that it is a fabrication to disguise the fact that he was the one who established slavery in the Americas and began the genocide of Native American cultures, along with the confiscation of his lands. So now we can begin to understand why the mythology of Columbus, that he had to be the first one to open up the New World, when in fact he was the last one who instituted the era of slavery and of confiscation of Native American lands. And this is this story is how I start the book, the two tales of Columbus, and it's really an essential part of what most of us were taught, beginning in elementary school all the way through college. And when we talk about a new history, and when we talk about amnesia that we seem to, as a world, be in, we have to, as Americans, start with this mythology of Columbus to really get our heads on straight, so we can really look back and see what happened before we ask the question, why was the history being covered up?
Question. Who do you think fabricated it? And do you believe that there was a general knowledge of the Americas, continent, island, whatever, to the west, by people like Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand or other sailors? I mean, was there a general knowledge and understanding at the time of Columbus? Or was that kind of a little secret thing he was working on? Any thoughts?
Yes, and that's a great question. And I've concluded that for the last couple of thousands of years, humanity has, in some aspects, devolved. And specifically, at the time of Columbus, I would say there wasn't. It was more. We were coming out of the Dark Ages then, and most of the history books had been destroyed. So there was not, at least in the West, a comprehensive understanding that there was a new world, although there was a significant amount of evidence. So I don't think that the monarchies really knew. They were in a state of ignorance. But before then, at the times when we were talking about the Celts, and before the Celts, the Minoans, and a period of time that goes back to the copper mining in the Americas many thousands and thousands of years ago, it was generally known that there was a new world, and it was called by different names in different cultures. And we have maps of the globe showing South America and North America, and these maps are documented in the book. So at various times, people knew more or less about the New World. In ancient times, the Phoenicians were really the masters merchants of the sea. And as an example, while many people, for example, Hebrews and Egyptians, they knew of the New World, but they may or may not have had the navigation and the ability of the Marines shipping to come to America. And certainly the Phoenicians were not going to share that. So there were certainly secrets about how to get to America and perhaps even where it was. But in ancient times, it was generally known throughout much of our history. But with the coming of the church and the Dark Ages, we in the West lost so much of our history and so much of our knowledge. That's why Columbus, uncovering the Arab maps from the city, the abandoned libraries in the city of Toledo, was able to have the benefit of what the Arabs and not only Arabs but other cultures knew at the time, that the Earth was round, that there was a new world given different names, and that it could be reached using the trade winds. So as we kind of entered into the Dark Ages, it was a very dark time for the West, and I think we have a collective memory loss, a failure to remember our history. And so, Columbus was able to pull the smoking of mirrors with King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella about his mission. But clearly, at the heart of his mission was to obtain gold and riches. And so he had to be able to give enough breadcrumbs to the monarchies to convince them that he was worthy of being funded and had a shot at bringing back gold.
I think that's interesting because that would make the assumption that they sort of thought there was gold or something out there to go get, because when you think about, Marco Polo and trips to the East, things that they brought back that you heard about were silks and spices and more commodities, not gold.
It's incredible to think that 1,500 years and further back than Columbus, Mediterranean cultures, as well as the Celts on the Iberian Peninsula and the Phoenicians of the Mediterranean, had regular merchant marines and sailing to the Americas for mostly copper mining. And this copper trade went on for millennium. And as many...
Why do they think that cultures like the Phoenicians and any of them did not have the capability of transatlantic travel?
It's such a mystery, Dr. Rita, that I think that we like to think of cultural superiority, and a sad example of that is the depiction of the Native Americans as savages, when the Native Americans were in many respects much more intelligent and civilized than the white coloners who came. They certainly, in the case of Mexico, had larger cities and structures in terms of their calendars. They were in some areas of their science were much more sophisticated. So through this process of taking a people and bringing them to the level of savages, it elevated the whites, and it justified the subjugation as well as the murderous events that took place with the confiscation of their lands and destruction of their culture. So it's I think at the heart of this debate is the rise of Christianity and the concept of the manifest destiny in the Americas, and how we return to a perspective where we don't have this concept that the moderns the smartest and the wisest and the greatest, we have an ability to absorb some of the ancient knowledge that has been left for us. But without taking another look, we're only going to see the ancients as savages and primitives. I talk about the copper trade, and when one thinks of the millions of tons of copper that went from the Michigan Peninsula to spur in the Bronze Age throughout Europe, and the significant shipping networks, smelting technologies, navigation, all of this that the Celts, the Phoenicians had in place, one almost has to laugh at the three little ships that Columbus set out. The masters of the seas from Indus Valley cultures as well as Mediterranean cultures far surpassed what the Spanish and the Portuguese had in the 1400s. And once we realize that there was a de-evolution that took place in Europe with the Dark Ages, a whole new world of understanding of the ancients and their wisdom opens up to us.
Well, and for a group to come across the ocean by boat and then travel inland to some location, do the mining, and then transport it back, I mean, I guess it would be a combination of overland and oversea. I'm not quite sure what route it would be. And then back across the ocean, there would have to be a substantial financial benefit to them to do it. I mean, you're not going to come all the way over here for a handful of copper and then go back.
It was high risk, but it was very lucrative. And in the case of the transatlantic travelers, we can certainly look at the copper mining in Michigan, as well as mining and the furs and other locations on the eastern seaboard. Coming from the Pacific and landing in what is now known as California and in Mexico, clearly the rich gold and silver deposits were used and to create wealth for city states as well as rulers. And you can imagine how much gold and silver there was in the California, before the 49ers. 1849 arrived. It was, and they were able to tap the gold on the surface as well as the deposits that came to the ground, and they were very abundant. So we have to realize that before Columbus sent his three dinky little ships, across the Atlantic into the Caribbean, that the ancient mariners, including the Phoenicians, the Celts, and Indus Valley cultures, were sailing the Pacific and the Atlantic for thousands of years in ships 10 times as big, holding hundreds of people that were able to come over here, including potentially horses and elephants. And we even find petroglyphs of elephants in Nevada, in some of North America's oldest petroglyph sites.
No way. Elephants?
Yes, in Grimes Point, Nevada. And they were recorded. These petroglyphs were probably recorded by ancestors to the Native Americans, and it's part of the record that these ancient travelers didn't lead, but were recorded by the ancient Americans of them being here. The smoking gun evidence in my book comes from the rock art left by these travelers in ancient writing systems depicting ancient deities. But certainly we see a diffusion of many of these old world symbols and characters in Native American art. And there's just literally hundreds of examples of symbols that have come from the old world and found their way in the new world. And these include over 20 major and significant glyphs that Dr. Gunnar Thompson documented coming from Asia that ended up in Mesoamerica, and they include symbols like the swastika from India that end up in many native groups, including the Pueblos. So part of the history and documentation of diffusionism includes the symbols used by these old world people that have been adapted by the ancestors to Native Americans and have been integrated into their cosmologies and into their symbolism. And it's not just the symbols like a swastika, but in some specific tribes, we find evidence of these old world languages that are embedded in the language of Native Americans. And most recently, with the advances in DNA, we're now discovering that the DNA and genetic codes found in some Native American tribes, including some bands of Cherokees, goes back to the Middle East. So more and more we're seeing how these people made it to the Americas and left their marks not only in stone and not only in the rock art and in some cases the words used by Native Americans, but actually in the DNA of some Native Americans.
Well, and it brings me back to my point. If you're going to be documenting solar events or lunar events in rock art, it would infer that you are going to be at a location for more than a couple of weeks or 6 months, that you needed to keep track of that time. And so it would make more sense that their cosmology, that their lifestyle, that their DNA would become integrated into the native population, just because they were there for a while. How long that while was, we don't really know, but more than 2 weeks.
It's not just one group and one exploration. But we really need to take the blinders off and take a fresh look and imagine the many different groups over different time frames that came to the Americas. And in some cases, as we've talked about, they came for riches, gold and silver. In some cases, in the case of the Celts, I believe they came here to colonize. But in other cases, true to modern America, there were peoples that were escaping political chaos. There were groups that were escaping climatic changes. And the new world was really a place where you can come and get started again. And
was melting pot. We're able to create beautiful monuments and pieces of art in around South America, in other places in the world. And then you start looking at indigenous cultures, not even just in the Americas, and you look at the petroglyphic art, and they're really bad artists. What is with that?
I'm going to just have to ask you to repeat that question. I missed some of it.
Okay. What I said is, when you look at artwork around the world, there is beautiful art that comes from a multitude of different time periods throughout our history. But when you look at petroglyph art, it seems like it's a 2-year-old drawing. Do you know if there was a reason why the level of artisanship or craftsmanship? I mean, if there are Egyptians coming and they're documenting something on a wall, why couldn't they get someone with good artisanship to? Why do we find just kind of bad art?
Well, it's very hard to generalize, is what I've discovered. And that, that we have to make the point that 99.9999% of rock art or petroglyphs in North America were made by Native Americans or the ancestors to Native Americans. It's only a very, very small percentage of petroglyphs or rock art or inscriptions that were made by Old World travelers. So these several dozen or perhaps several scores of excellent sites where they have Old World inscriptions are very rare. We have to remember that carving into rocks is not an easy thing, and even though we believe they had metal tools, it doesn't make the task any really easier compared to drawings and some of we would say the sophisticated art of cultures like the Egyptians and the Chinese. These travelers had come across to the Americas with very little in the way of artifacts, and they didn't have a lot of resources. So a lot of what they were doing was on the fly. And so we don't have, like an artist that's complete job of an ancient group of doing rock art. Now, that's not the case with Native Americans, who clearly had shamans or other members of the tribe that were very specialized in this. And my experience, and this might surprise you, is that the most sophisticated and the most dramatic rock art is the oldest rock art, and it begins to get less and less dramatic and less specific, and until you get into the much of the Plain Indians period, where you kind of have stick figures on horses. And so we not only lose some of the artistic qualities, but most importantly, we lose the cosmological qualities. What we find in a lot of this rock art are encoded alchemy and encoded astronomy, and the symbols that were used were very specific to minerals, to mining, to astrology, to astronomy. So as some of the rock art advances in the America, much of this wisdom is lost. There's a word for that. It's called hermetic drift. That is, that at one time the symbol that perhaps could have come from across the Pacific or the Atlantic, like the swastika, had a very specific meaning. But as ancestors to the Native Americans copied it from generation to generation, they maintained the symbol, but some of the meaning was lost through hermetic drift. So that by the time you get to the most recent petroglyphs and pictoglyphs made with painting as opposed to rock carving, a lot of that wisdom seems to have been lost. But I have to tell you that the wisdom is still there. And this last cross-quarter day, I was at a native...
We need to go to break.
Okay.
We need to go to break. Sound okay?
You bet.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Are you looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry. IRN's new interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN chat lounge, the game lounge, video lounge, or the mood lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless. Use your time wisely, keeping it all on IRN.
Who were the gods of antiquity? They've been described as the forces of nature, levels of consciousness, and aspects of our psyche. Stories that depict their incredible weapons, their flying machines, and their amazing adventures are characterized as being the product of our ancestors' fanciful imaginations. But what if the tales of the gods are true? Did the writers, chroniclers, and scribes of our distant past actually document a realistic view of our origin? My latest book, Man-Made: The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, looks at our most ancient legends. Learn of the torrid romances, elaborate plots, violent scandals, and conspiracies that played out in antiquity. Find out the role the gods played in the life and culture we have today. If you want to find out the truth of who we are and where we come from, order your copy of Man-Made today. For more information, go to www.manmadethechronicles.com. That's www.manmadethechronicles.com.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Move past the crossroads in your life and discover alternative solutions to your deepest concerns at soulhealer.com. So whether it's a physical problem, an emotional issue, a question about work, or troubles in your relationships, naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise can help you. Bring peace, harmony, and health back into your life. Schedule a session today. Visit soulhealer.com right away and live the life you've been dreaming of.
You didn't forget what's coming up tonight, did you? Hi, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Never miss that interview you were looking forward to or the show on your favorite topic. Follow IRN on Twitter, I_R_N, and get reminders about the evening's live shows as well as fun and important updates throughout the week. That's I_R_N, and never miss a great show again.
We only have a couple of seconds before we have to get back to the show, and I want to tell you how you can jumpstart your intuition today. Using my free 50-page introductory guide filled with simple, revolutionary, and proven techniques, you can ignite your intuition and tap into your inner wisdom, all from the comfort of your own home. The Institute of Applied Energetics is the leader in online home study instruction for those interested in becoming a certified medical intuitive, intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner. Now is the time to transform your life and take it to a completely new level. Discover who you are and how you work. Open the door to the world of intuition, health, and healing. You can jumpstart your intuition right away by going to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and downloading our free guide. Get the opportunity of a lifetime and live the life you deserve. Download your free Jumpstart Your Intuition guide today at www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and begin living a life filled with passion and purpose.
Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
Go deep inside yourself and venture into the realm of the unconscious mind with my Meditating on the Kabbalah guided imagery audio CDs. Discover who you are and what you want in life. Meditating on the Kabbalah can help you to open, clear, and revitalize the energetic pathways of your subtle being. They will support you in your spiritual quest by helping you to access the profound insights and inner guidance you need as you work in alignment with your highest good. Let them help you to release negative thoughts and emotions and clear away any limitations that may be keeping you from experiencing your full potential. Walk down the path to health, healing, understanding, and enlightenment with meditating on the Kabbalah. Order your copy today at www.soulhealer.com. That's right, that's www.soulhealer.com.
Hello, Inception Radio Network. Would you like your favorite show to be played again live on air? Well, now the choice is in your hands with IRN's live request portal, an easy way to request your favorite show with a simple click. IRN's live request portal now gives you exclusive access to all of the shows. How easy is it? Simply type a show name or a guest name, click request, even write a dedication message, and that's it. Try it now. Simply visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com, click on the live request tab under the show menu. Now playing your favorite show is just a mouse click away.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. If you weren't listening earlier to the announcements, if you haven't already gotten your copy of Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients, it is now available on DVD, which you can get from soulhealer.com. And what we're doing is bundling it together with a copy of my book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods and Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4. And they're packaged together at an unbelievably low cost. So please do go to the site and check it out. Also, the Institute of Applied Energetics, that's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, has their training programs on sale. So if you are thinking about a new career as a medical intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner, check it out because it might be the training you've been looking for. We've been here talking to Carl Lehrburger about his book, The Secrets of Ancient America. His webpage is newhistoryofamerica.net. Hey, Carl, how's it going?
It's going great. We had a little break, and we're getting ready to pick it up again.
That's right. Before the break, you were mentioning a number of different cultures that have come to the Americas, and one of that you have mentioned the most was the Celts. And I have to tell you, I was interviewing Hugh Newman. They were doing the Megalomythomania conference in New England. And I'm like, why do it in New England? He goes, because there's a bunch of megalithic sites there. And I'm like, get out of town. I mean, I grew up in New York. I never heard about it. I have to live in Texas to find out something that apparently is down the street from my sister. Anyway, in America, all right, so the Celts and that part of the northern part of the UK, one of the things we find are like dolmen and standing stones and other structures like that. Do we find things like that that would be typified by that culture in the Americas?
Well, there's a rich history in America of many groups coming to the New World, if you will. And in my discussions with people, I often ask them, what's your ancestry? And more often than not, I can surprise them by telling them that their ancestors, whether they be Roman or Celtic or Egyptian or Hebrew or even Hindus and Arabs, their ancestors made it to America, and they are just floored. In the case of the Celts, we have a significant body of evidence, and that's why I focused on the Celts in my book, describing sites in 5 different chapters. but their stronghold clearly was in New England. And right probably in the area where you grew up, I don't know what part of New York, but an example would be on the Taconic Parkway, which goes in western Connecticut and Massachusetts and into New York. There are literally hundreds of stone chambers, most of them oriented toward equinox alignments, and some of them actually having inscriptions in them. And these are some of the old chambers that we believe were left by the Celts. Now, New England has a very rich history with the Celts, and the most prolific site is known as America's Stonehenge. It's in southern New Hampshire, and it's an extensive megalithic site that includes ritual chambers and megaliths and a very sophisticated calendrical area where you can stand in the middle of the site, and citing to megalithic stones on the outside of the site, you can line up to the equinoxes, the solstices, and even the lunar alignments known as the 19-day lunar cycle. So that's an extensive site. And they also have artifacts of the Celts that are in museums in Vermont. But in addition to what was left in New England in the form of dolmens, stone chambers, and inscriptions, in Colorado, Kansas, and Oklahoma, we find Celtic writing. And the writing is accompanying a archaeoastronomy event, and it's describing the event. So you not only have writing in the Ogham writing system in a Gaelic language that describes a sun god, but you have the archaeoastronomy animation or calendar right there to confirm it. So the Celts really left quite a legacy if we have the wisdom to understand the archaeoastronomy and how they communicated, and we have the willingness to be professional epigraphers and archaeologists and study what was left as evidence. But in addition to the Celts, there's many different artifacts and evidence that has been left. Most recently, of the Norse people, the Kensington runestone in Minnesota is one of many different monuments or artifacts that were recorded in runes or in a runic language, and we find those in different places in America. You mentioned the Romans and coins. There's been hundreds of coins found, and many of them Roman coins that are usually washed up in very specific locations that were probably part of a shipwreck of some kind. But I have a picture of a Roman coin in my book, Secrets of Ancient America, that is about 2,000 years old, and it was found in Springfield, Colorado, when they were digging a well. It was found about 2 feet underground. So there just a whole evidence that pertains to coins and from Romans and others. There have been several significant shipwrecks in the Americas that have been discovered with Roman vases on them, both off the coast of South America and Central America, going back at least 2,000 years. We've found evidence of the Phoenicians in artifacts in South America in a collection called the Crespi collection that was assembled by a father, Carlo Crespi. And among the artifacts that he collected by trading with the Indians were gold plates that have images of Babylonian astrologers, as well as Babylonian writing that were recorded, and most of those artifacts are no longer around anymore. The gold has probably been smelted down by now, but we have clear photographs of them and research papers on them to show that the Phoenicians were in South America, and they left their mark there. There are a number of different. Sorry, go ahead.
And don't lose your train of thought, but the part I find interesting is just about everything that you've talked about. I've heard people try to debunk it. The Kensington Runestone, America's Stonehenge, Father Crespi's collection, that was just a bunch of forgeries. And, and I think they're real. But just the amount of negative press these items get to, I'm going to say, perpetuate that myth.
Well, it's a big problem, and it's a double-edged sword, and I'm going to try not to lose my train of thought, but you raise a very important point. Excuse me. And it really comes to light because the fact of the matter is that there have been hundreds of hoaxes and fakes that have been perpetuated to try to prove that old world peoples were here and to make money. And there was actually an era in America called the Age of Hoaxes. And there was just a proliferation of fakes that occurred, and in some cases, some of these that I went to investigate in the Midwest, and I write about it in my book, they're very difficult to discern as fakes. But if you were to, in one case, one of the copper tablets that has been discussed as being from an old world source, from a Hebrew source, was actually made with modern copper. So it's not as though we all shouldn't have a little bit of skepticism when we look into this field, because there have been so many fakes. But what we've had occur is that the archaeopriest community and the archaeological community have literally thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And we see this in the case of, for example, Barry Fell, who wrote American BC, one of the early diffusionist pioneers. Well, Barry made some mistakes, and he got some things wrong. And now anybody in the archaeological community who would bring up Barry Fell as a credible source is discredited because of some of those errors that Barry made. However, in spite of the many frauds, in spite of the many hoaxes, in spite of some researchers not getting everything 100% right, there is significant amount of proof that the ancients were here. And I focus on the Celts because they left their writing, in Gaelic, that accompany the petroglyphs, as well as other evidence such as coins and artifacts that we have. But other cultures left their mark in inscriptions as well. A later day group of Romans from about 750 AD to about 900 AD settled in an area in Arizona known as Calais. And we know about the city of Calais because they left their story in lead crosses and written in Latin. And these inscriptions describe an aggressive group of Romans that actually we can say Roman Jews, because they had, in addition to the Latin writing and very heavily early Christianity orientation, they had a lot of Hebrew symbols, as well as representations of the Ten Commandments with Hebrew writing. And these artifacts are housed. There's 32 artifacts, a handful of them these lead crosses, but there were other religious artifacts that are housed in a museum in Tucson, but they're not on display. So that we have a great a story there of Romans and Hebrews in America, as well as documentation of Hindu people in California and Nevada have coming across here. But the point you raise is very important, which is, how do we tell what's a fake and what's a real artifact? And at the end of the day, and until we can get the National Geographic archaeologist, the university anthropologist, the Smithsonian to open up their records, until we can get the status quo to investigate these claims and verify it, we're going to be continuing to have the new history of America on your show instead of in the history books that our kids and grandkids are learning. So part of what is necessary to really get to the truth of the matter is that we have to have legitimate archaeologists do legitimate studies, and that has to a large extent not been forthcoming. And part of the reason for that is that the gatekeepers have not allowed a diffusionist perspective in academia. And until that happens, our new history is going to be underground, and the old history is going to be the paradigm. And people are going to, in America, are going to continue to celebrate Columbus Day, not realizing they're really celebrating the genocide of the Native American people. So we do have opportunities to turn this around in academia and culturally by, for example, instead of celebrating Columbus Day, we should be celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, or a multicultural holiday that is inclusive of not just the white Christians, but all the contributors to our great multi-diversity that is part of our history and our heritage in America.
But if you think about it, investigation into I'm going to say North America in particular. I mean, there's some stuff that's going on in Mesoamerica and South America, not nearly as much as I think should be happening, but something. But in North America, the amount of research and archaeological work that's being done is minute because, quote unquote, there is no history.
Well, it's a lot of what I study is out in the four states area of New Mexico and Colorado, where we have Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde. And it's amazing to me that you go out into Four Corners or you go to places like Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde, you will find scores of graduate students, archaeological projects going on, studying Anasazi sites, by the hundreds of archaeologists. But you take any of the dozen or so old world sites that I've documented in my book and add to that dozens documented by other researchers, and you go to look at an alignment that has a very sophisticated animation at equinox telling a cosmological story accompanied by Gaelic writing, and there's no archaeologists, no graduate students, no interest whatsoever. So it's shocking that so much time has transpired since Barry fell, and it was really put well by a NASA researcher, Raleigh Gillespie, who worked on the original Apollo project and was an archaeoastronomer that made it out to Colorado and Oklahoma to explore with Bill McGlone and Phil Leonard some of these Celtic sites. And in an interview, Roland suggested that it was going to take a generation or two for the archaeologists to take the blinders off and a new paradigm to emerge, which emphasized a diffusionist approach and a balanced approach at looking at the evidence. Unfortunately, and I say this, it's really tragic, Raleigh Gillespie seemed to have had it wrong. It wasn't one or two generations, but it's taking 3 and 4 generations for us to realize that the Columbus story is a myth, that he was last, not first, that ancient cultures from around the world made it to the Americas, North America, Central America, and South America for thousands of years, in some cases leaving their mark in stone, in other cases leaving their symbols that have been adapted by the ancestors to the Native Americans, in addition to symbols, language, and the DNA. So we still have a lot of work to do, Dr. Rita.
Well, I mean, you're definitely just kind of opening up a giant can of worms, but I think it's an important can of worms to be opening up. You've been talking about the Celts and the Egyptians and these different groups coming in and doing these astrological astronomy calendars with the petroglyphs. Were there any that were uniquely Native American sites where you found the same type of symbolism and tracking of the solstices also?
Yes, and that's a great segue. The first real site that I was able to learn archaeoastronomy was a Native American site known as the Pathfinder. And at the Pathfinder, we have very sophisticated archaeoastronomy, and we have the images pecked on a 30-foot panel. And on the equinox, there's a giant sun dagger at noon that comes across the panel and specifically hits 4 petroglyphs, and these are celebrating fertility, and we are able to see the enactment of the of changing woman, also known as Wadapuki, who is in some Native American tribes considered to be First Mother. And in this depiction of Wadapuki, or First Mother, we see the point of the sun in the form of a sun dagger coming and striking her and impregnating her, which is consistent with the mythology that the sun impregnated First Mother, who gave birth to the hero twins. So we see this very sophisticated archaeoastronomy, light and shadow interplay on petroglyphs that kind of create a moving image telling the story of First Mother. So most of, as I've said before, most of the petroglyphs, nearly all the petroglyphs in North America are Native American. And the Native Americans have in their cosmology, these same universal archetypes that we see played out by other cultures and in other locations throughout the world. So I described the death of the sun god in Oklahoma in a Mithraic context left by Celts, but in nearby Colorado we have the Pathfinder site where the ancestors to the Native Americans depicted the fertilization of Wadapuki, First Mother, in a very graphic and a very using fertility symbols to describe not only the myth of Wadapuki, but these images and these petroglyph panels were used to teach the young. So you can imagine that the old wise mothers and the shamans would take the young boys and girls in their puberty up to these sacred sites. And as the sun is rising in the sky and a light beam, begins to interplay with the petroglyphs of Wadapuki, they're able to tell the story of the birds and the bees that we just never were able to tell very well in our society. They were able to talk about the cosmology of Father Sun impregnating Mother earth, and from that, the tribe comes into being, and then there is the story of the dragon slayer and all the stories that follow. So yes, the Native Americans did a lot of encoding using archaeoastronomy, and they left a lot of their wisdom, and I would argue some of it coming from these ancient old world travelers, but certainly we don't want to say that was the source of the Native American religions, but we certainly see some inspiration there, and in some cases we see a continuity of the fertility symbols, of the travels of the sun god, and most importantly, and the most important symbol that we see is the serpent. The serpent of consciousness is the most important ancient symbol that we find both in Native American art and in the old world peoples who left their mark. And I would argue that when one investigates rock art and one really tries to understand what it is that they're talking about in a general sense, the theme is consciousness. The theme is awakening. The theme is the cycles of nature and the emergence of consciousness. So we find the theme of the serpent throughout Native American art and throughout Native American monuments, including the serpent mounds. But these were not just Native American. We also find them coming from other cultures. An example of this is a petroglyph site in California that is significantly older than the Celtic sites of several millennium. But this what seems to be a trans-Pacific Ocean petroglyph site made by Indus Valley cultures has a Heliolithic animation or equinox light show that depicts a light serpent engulfing an egg that's positioned between 4 concentric circles. So as the sun rises, a light serpent or a light dagger moves across the panel, and its open fanged mouth fits perfectly in this petroglyphic egg or disc, only on the equinox. Now, this is the same theme that we have at America's largest earthwork that we know of, the Serpent Mound, which is a giant serpent that has a disc in its mouth. So we can really begin to see that the universal symbols that we see in rock art were not just from the Native Americans or not just from Celts coming from the Atlantic or from Indus Valley people, but they're universal symbols that were a shared language of the ancients that we're just beginning to uncover now.
Yay! I've been beating that wagon for a while. Okay, so I have to play a little bit devil's advocate here. You're talking about these alignments, and the serpent moves, and it engulfs the egg just at the equinox. But couldn't it just be a coincidence? Couldn't it just be that you're kind of adding something on to a very innocent number of little scratches in a rock?
Well, I've done my best in the book to pick the most compelling evidence that circumvents that potential argument that it was coincidental, they were just scratching. And I would go back and repeat what I said before. These are very, very specific. And in some cases, these alignments have counter marks. So they show 3 days before the equinox, 2 days before the equinox, 1 day before the equinox, the day of the equinox, 1 day after the equinox. So there's no possibility with these counting marks and a full light show on the equinox that it was random. Now, that's not to say that there's a lot of coincidences that perhaps occur. And it's not to say that there is some random elements at work. However, the science of archaeoastronomy sets out to document the science behind it. We can say 100% for sure that this particular alignment at Anubis Cave, or this particular alignment at the Pathfinder site in Colorado, or a particular alignment at Crack Cave in Colorado, are very precise chronometers. They are not random. It's not guesstimate. We can prove it, and we can prove it in addition to the chronometers working like sundials. But we can find Gaelic inscriptions that describe the event. Now, once we establish the fact that these are archaeoastronomy events, the precise calendar keepers, chronometers, then the question becomes, okay, who did it and why? Well, now we get into an area which is not quite as scientific. And as an example, I was talking about Pathfinder and the Pathfinder depicting First Mother Awatapuki. Well, we can prove that the Pathfinder is a very precise equinox animation and a very precise equinox solar marker. And we can prove that beyond a doubt. But we can't prove that the animation is telling the story of Watapuki and First Mother. So there's interpretations there, and that's why we're trying to get cultural anthropologists to that site to verify what we think is happening. In the case of the Anubis Cave, which I talked about, once again, there is nothing random about the alignments. And I want to emphasize, Dr. Rita, at Anubis Caves, it's not just one alignment that takes place on equinox eve as the sun is setting, but nearly a dozen that will only line up on that day. And some of these are counting marks. Others, the beam of light will strike a circle. In others, you have an animation. But in all cases, they only work precisely on the equinox. Now, to be able to say that this pecked image is Mithras, the sun god, as opposed to another deity, for example, Hercules, or another religion from being Mithraic, well, that's where we need more researchers to document. And that's why it would be great to have European researchers take a look at the documentation of Anubis Cave to verify what Bill McGlone and Phil Leonard have documented, that this is, in fact, a Mithraic temple, that it is documenting prayers to the sun god, and the cosmology shows both Egyptian and Celtic goddesses that interplay with each other on the equinox. So, yes, there is an element of randomness, but in the best cases, there's nothing random about it. And I would argue that they're smoking gun proof. And the only thing that's lacking is the validation by the archaeological community that continues to dispute many of these sites. And I would just add, in the case of the Colorado site, known as Crack Cave, 60 Minutes did a segment on Crack Cave in I believe in the late 80s, in the late 90s, in the early 90s, and it was this segment can be seen at www.archaeoastronomy.com, and it was seen by literally millions of people. But we forgot about it, and we weren't able to light the fire under the archaeologists. And I don't think only a handful of archaeologists have ever been to this site, although dozens and scores are doing research at Anasazi sites that are 1,000 years old. So I would argue the proof is there. These are very exact chronometers, and there's not wiggle room in terms of the science and of how precise they are. However, the interpretation is always going to be subject to debate.
You used a word, and now I have to kind of take a step back and ask a question. You said that there are a number of glyphs that are animated. Now, I just had like a little potential light bulb moment if this is what's going on. I mean, I know that on the equinox in Chichen Itza on the temple, that as the sun is going down or going up or whatever direction it's going, it looks like the serpent is either going into the ground or the serpent is going up the side of the pyramid. And I would consider that an animation. Are you talking about a similar kind of effect?
Exactly correct. And
Get out of town.
The difference is this. Chichen Itza and Stonehenge and Newgrange, perhaps, are monumental. In other words, embedded in the architecture of these monuments is the archaeoastronomy. And you will, in the case of Newgrange, you'll have in Ireland, you'll have the sunlight on winter solstice sunrise go through this long chamber and strike a petroglyph on the wall. However, with the exception of America's Stonehenge in southern New Hampshire that I talked about earlier, which is clearly megalithic and employs archaeoastronomy, most of what we see in North America is petroglyphic archaeoastronomy. And the animation you refer to is the interplay of the light and the shadow that move on a petroglyph. So you have a two-dimensional petroglyph, and on a very intentional day, the light and shadow interplay with it to create an animation. And we find the most sophisticated that I've seen have been some of these old world sites in Colorado and Oklahoma, but in California. However, they also include more recent Native American sites that are the Native Americans and the ancestors are the carriers of this archaeoastronomy wisdom, and that allow us to really peer into the cosmology and the beliefs of the ancients that left these stories and left them in stone for us and our children to recognize their wisdom and their beliefs. So it's an amazing art form that is consistent with the universal symbols that we find throughout the ancient world. And here in North America, much of that wisdom is encoded in the rocks, and we just need the patience and opening up of the records to decipher them in a much more universally acceptable way.
But I would think if these petroglyphs, quote unquote, came to life during very specific times of the year, they would be considered magical as well, which takes it even to a different level of understanding and relationship that the people would have with them.
These events are ecstatic events, Dr. Rita. When you are at a petroglyph site that celebrates the equinox or a cross-quarter day, and most of these, it takes quite a bit of time and resources to get to, and you set yourself up and you're waiting for the sun to come up or you're waiting for the sun to come down, and over half an hour or 45 minutes, you see a light dagger form and begin to move, or you see a triangle begin to form on top of the vulva of a feminine petroglyph, or you see some type of rising of the light of a sun symbol. It is a near ecstatic experience that to not only witness something like that take place, but to have a personal connection with the creator of that, and where we can say, I acknowledge your wisdom and thank you for sharing and preserving your wisdom for my children. And so when we can get to that point of reading the petroglyphs, understanding the petroglyphs, that they were not just meant for the people who created them, and they aren't just there for explorers and avid researchers to uncover and study, but these petroglyphs are there for our children to help tell the story of humanity and what was covered up and why.
I'm looking at the clock. We have a little over 10 minutes. I'll just say 10 minutes. Because I wanted to cover one other topic that I think is important, and that's the mounds, the giant mounds. You mentioned the serpent mound in North America. Are the builders of the mounds being reevaluated? I mean, a lot of people say that the Native Americans built them. You ask the Native Americans, they say they didn't build them. They were already there. In light of all of these new cultural groups that are being uncovered in the Americas, do you think there's any connection with the mounds and these cultural groups? Or do you think it was just somebody completely different?
Well, like the case of the Native Americans, it's almost, from my vantage point, impossible to generalize. It really is. Because we have so many different groups coming in over so many different times, and then we have the intermingling with Native Americans, and then we have the Native American culture themselves. So the question of who built the mounds, I think we almost have to be specific, because there are tens of thousands of mounds. Now, the controversy over who are the mound builders in modern times was really brought to an end by the creators of the Smithsonian Institute. And the early research into the mounds was undertaken by Thomas. His name was Cyrus Thomas of the Smithsonian, who worked with John Wesley Powell. And even though they uncovered instances of European artifacts in the mounds, Thomas was to write, and this is a paraphrase, concerning the artifacts of European origin, we will not speak of these. That's almost a paraphrase, and I talk about it in the book. So even the professional archaeologists were coming up with artifacts that indicated that it wasn't just Native Americans. Going back to the copper trade in Michigan, we see that goes back into the Bronze Age, so we're talking many, many thousands of years ago. We see a very vibrant merchant groups coming in here, and mining groups with literally hundreds of boats, thousands of workers, and over time. And part of the transportation network from Michigan included the Mississippi River. And one can imagine that much of that copper was loaded on boats that went down the Mississippi, and perhaps Poverty Point in Louisiana was served as a terminus for copper coming from Michigan, but also as a welcome center for those new travelers coming from Europe and coming from the Mediterranean. And so we see a tremendous group of travelers coming and going up the Mississippi and then branching out into the tributaries of the Mississippi. So in over time, there are many different cultures, including Native American cultures, including the Cahokian culture, including different phases of the mound builder culture. And as I guess what I discovered is that there's so much more to discover, and that this is why we all have to call for an opening up of the records of the Smithsonian to help us understand some of the artifacts that have been covered up. And we also have to take a look at this mound building culture and the relics from the Midwest with a fresh perspective, that there has been evidence of smelters of the copper in Poverty Point and surrounding areas. And there is evidence of old world cultures that did mingle with some of the mound builder cultures. But I would have to say that it is one of the great mysteries that is being uncovered as we speak, with additional evidence that Egyptian travelers made it up the Mississippi and left a significant amount of documentation that they were sailors and involved in the copper trade, involved in smelting, and even the name the Mississippi is an Egyptian word. So the history of the mound building cultures has to be reevaluated, but I am not in a position to say that the original mound builders were not Native American. I think that we have definitive evidence of commingling. We do find some artifacts that would indicate that, but there's a lot more research to do with the mound building culture. And as I referred to earlier, depicting this history and understanding it is complicated by all of the hoaxes and fraudulent relics that abound in the Midwest. So it's not a simple exercise, but the more focus we get from professional archaeologists that are willing to look at diffusionist evidence, the closer we're going to get to answering your question, Dr. Rita.
At this point, I do feel that they are starting to be heard by the way for on board. The people are reaching, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know, the majority of the people question the timeline of the pyramids being built 3200 BC, and there's a growing belief that they are much older. And so, but if we wait for academia to catch up with that belief, you know, I think I'll be dead by then. So why hang everything on academia?
Well, you know, this is a great radio show, and I think that you know there's a very receptive audience, and the underground radio networks. You know, there's obviously a grassroots understanding that we've been lied to, but in terms of breaking through the paradigm that's really binding us all right now, so that when we can look at a National Geographic issue and see a story on the Kensington Runestone, or see a story on Anubis Cave in Oklahoma documenting a Celtic presence, or seeing a story on the artifacts of Calais in Arizona, documenting a Roman presence in the New World, we're going to continue to be considered to be the fringe folks. So so part of really embracing a new history of America is purging the old history, so that as our kids go to school, they're not taught a bunch of lies like we were. And so I think to get to that place, Dr. Rita, we have to bring in the archaeologists, the anthropologists, the so-called scientific community, and get them to apply scientific methods in investigating the old world people in America. We don't need, you and I and our radio listeners don't need a stamp of approval from science, because we know we've been misled. And we continue to work to bring to light the ancient wisdom that is sometimes just right in front of us, and the ancient history that has been disguised. But we're really seeking a breakthrough on a more universal level that includes academia, that includes mainstream organizations like National Geographic and the Smithsonian, that includes curriculums in school that take pride in a multicultural history, as opposed to just a single white Christian history. So that's part of the work that I'm involved in terms of writing Secrets of Ancient America. I know that's part of the work you're involved in with your radio network and your show. And I know that's part of the work that our listeners are involved in, or they wouldn't be listening, seeking knowledge to, dispel the propaganda and myths that have prevented us from not only knowing our history, but as a result, not knowing who we are. So we're entering an age, I hope, where the amnesia of the past is being dissipated, and a new perspective of our, not only our history, but the reason for us being on planet Earth right now is emerging. And I think that to really get that message across and bring it into the mainstream, we do have to reach out to the scientific community.
Well, on that note, I think we need to call it a show, because I think the music is going to be coming up as I speak. So, Carl, thank you so much for coming on.
Well,
and
thank you.
And about your book.
I appreciate it. And visitors interested in the book can go to www.newhistoryofamerica.com. And they can get a copy of the book there, or email me. And one of the best things about doing these shows is hearing from people that have their own stories, have their own sites, have their own evidence that they've uncovered. So I'd love to hear from people. And thank you for the gracious the invitation to your show, Dr. Rita.
That was Carl Lehrburger. His webpage is newhistoryofancientamerica.net. His book is Secrets of Ancient America. And next week, we're going to be speaking to Mary Rodwell and Ray Hernandez about experiencers, UFO-related ET contact. And in the second hour with Robert Davis about UFOs. Should I believe? Until next time, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.